Hey, I'm coming at you from the webcam dimension to tell you about the interview you're about to watch. This is the third in a series of follow-up interviews I've done talking to former staffers of GameFan or other magazines that were owned by Dave Halverson, one of the main subjects of the Die Hard documentary that I put out at this point 2 years ago. Mollie Patterson worked at both Die Hard GameFan and Play Magazine, and she was a really integral part of the story. She provided tons and tons of interview and firsthand accounts of the events that happened there, and I finally got the chance to talk to her. Now, talking to Mollie was a great time, and as always, the full interview, which is around 3 hours, is going to be posted on my podcast channel. But I do have to open this with a bit of an unfortunate disclaimer. There was a GameFan staffer named Nick DeBar, also known as Nick Rocks, who was a longtime associate of Mollie's and worked with her at both GameFan and Play Magazine. In February, Nick DeBar was arrested for some extremely inappropriate behavior with a minor. It is a very weird, uncomfortable situation. It's really unfortunate all around, especially for the people who knew him. And this disclaimer is to say that this interview was recorded before that news came out. He does come up a few times, at once or twice in this interview and as well as in the full version. And I wanted to let you guys know that if that had happened earlier, or if we had known about that earlier, if the arrest had happened, this probably would have gone in a different direction, and that's basically why we don't mention it and it doesn't come up here. Big bummer that I have to say something like that. It is extremely unfortunate. But with that behind us, I hope you guys can enjoy this this really fun interview. It was genuinely great, and for even more fun stories and tidbits and anecdotes from Mollie, be sure to go check out the full version, because I was only able to cram this down into about, like, I thought, the essential 45 minutes. Thank you so much. Hi.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Well, it's really nice to meet you. You were one of the most vital sources of information when I was making
I got a big mouth on this GameFan stuff.
Yeah. How did you end up joining GameFan? Because you were on like the kind of like second wave of talent who came on, sort of.
I would actually say I was like a third wave of talent.
Okay.
And I'll go through this as quick as I can because there's a little bit of backstory for me. So in elementary school, I had a chance to have a computer at home, which I know sounds very quaint now, but like that wasn't a thing a lot when I was a kid. Yeah. I would make little like video game newsletters for myself because I was a really big fan of video game magazines. From when they first started kind of coming out, I was really into them, and I wanted to do my own, and so I just make like this one sheet kind of thing. I go on to high school, and like a lot of teenagers, I decide I need to rebel against society and find my voice, and bring the man down and stuff like that. And so I get with some friends and we make a quote unquote underground art and literature fanzine called Honor Students on Acid. And so we did like, poetry and writing and art and like, yeah, man, this is how our school's wrong. This is how society is wrong and stuff like that. There was a music and bookstore downtown in my hometown that was kind of a more like alternative scene kind of place that a lot of kids would go and hang out in and look for books and music and stuff. And so we would take issues of HSOA, as we called it, down there and drop them off down there for free. And while I'm there browsing the music, I hear in the background somebody like, oh my God, the new issue of HSOA is here. This is so awesome. And it was like, there's somebody actually reading my stuff that I'm making. And then this is kind of so cool. For you or anybody else, it's kind of like that day that you put up a YouTube video and all of a sudden, instead of getting like 2 or 3 views, you're getting like 100 or 200, Yeah. It's like, wow, somebody actually cares about what I'm doing. Yeah. While I was a fan of GameFan, the one and only issue they ever had where in the back of the magazine, they had an ad saying we're looking for new writers. And so I was like, I wonder if I could do this. And so I put together a packet. I put together copies of my fanzines. So I sent him this package, and this would have been, I want to say, May or June of 1996. And then I get a call from Dave, and he's like, hey, I love your work. I love your fanzines. I love everything you've done. He's like, hey, we'll move you out here to California, just hang out for a few months, and then we'll bring you out here. And then I moved to California in August of that year. And my start with GameFan was absolutely horrific. It was like a terrible first impression.
Where did you live
terrible first
before?
experience.
Where did you live before? Where'd you move from?
Omaha, Nebraska.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that's...
Yeah.
Was that like a big culture shock?
It was kind of, yeah, because so I had just turned 21. So I was not like a kid, because some of the staff members, when they started, they were like 15, 16.
They were illegally employed. Yeah.
Yes. So I was not that far down.
Yeah.
I really didn't know kind of what I was doing in life, and that it was a big, big experience to move from kind of Midwest to this big, gigantic, Los Angeles coastal town kind of thing.
Yeah. It's in the 90s, LA. That must have been crazy.
I get there, and somebody's supposed to pick me up from the airport, and they don't.
Oh,
and
no.
Me being a complete idiot, I had the office phone number, and I had the office address, and that's all I had. And this is like, I want to say 7 o'clock on a Friday. There's nobody there to pick me up, and I have no idea what to do, where to go. And I called the office, and there's no answer. And so I'm like, oh man. And the only thing I could think to do was to find a hotel near the airport. And me not knowing Los Angeles, yeah, it was pretty sketchy back then. And
this is 7 at night? Not in the morning?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, geez.
7 at night, yeah.
Oh, wow.
And so I basically spent the entire weekend in kind of this sketchy hotel. I'm sorry, not even a hotel, a motel. A sketchy motel near LAX. Like, wanting desperately to, get in contact with somebody at GameFan to find out what to do. And so it took me until Monday morning to finally talk to somebody and get them to bring me out to the offices. So David only really talked to me over the phone and everything, and he knew me from my writing and stuff, but I was a young person, kind of looking like a young person in more what I would say like the alternative scene back then. And I think he wasn't expecting me to look how I looked. And he kind of just looked at me and panicked a little bit. He asked me to take a game and go play it for a while and write about it. And this is my first day there at GameFan. I went and I played the game, and I wrote a preview for it, and it was probably a terrible preview, because like I said, it was my first thing for GameFan. I didn't really know their voice yet. I didn't have anybody kind of talk to me about like what they were looking for and stuff. And he hated my preview. So in a more professional situation, you would sit somebody down and say, okay, here's what you wrote. Here's what I think is good. Here's what I think is bad. Here's what I would change. Here's kind of what we would do more for our voice. But it was none of that. And he just kind of like, oh, okay. And I found out later that he just hated my preview. So my first day, he hated how I looked. He hated how I wrote. And so that's where I kind of got pushed into the online stuff as well as the magazine stuff, instead of being more focused on the magazine, where I got into doing all the like press release rewrites and stuff that you had talked about. Back then, any press releases that came out, you would just throw them up on your website because there wasn't a lot of news that was being generated otherwise. Nowadays in the modern era, all that stuff comes in via email. But back then, like, these press releases would come in via fax, and then you would need somebody to literally sit there and retype the entire thing. And it's just like long nonsense, Los Angeles, California, blah, 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 blah kind of stuff. Yeah. And it was worthless content, really, if you weren't writing it into something else new. But for some reason back then, we felt like this stuff had to be on the site. So my first job was sitting there and just retyping this stuff. And it was awful. It was truly, truly awful. And it made me kind of just hate my job right away. And I hated it. And I hated being on the website. I never wanted to be on the website. I wanted to be in the magazine. And that kind of sent me down a path of just hating having to do like online stuff at that point. We can't just put up content from the mag because it'll cannibalize our sales of the issues. So it was still a lot of, we just don't know what to do with it, which kind of led into me taking it over once Ryan, cause I think Ryan didn't want to be doing it either. And so once he talked Dave into getting doing more magazine stuff and then handing the site to me, it was just that same kind of feeling of like, okay, great, we have a site, but what do we even do with it?
Was there someone who was, overseeing the direction of the website? Because
no,
you started doing the anime fan section. I was like, that seems kind of random to just spin off from the gaming website.
Yeah, no. I mean, and I'll tell you a quick funny story. I mean, it was to the point where, so Nick DeBar, who's Nick Rocks in the magazine, he came up to me and he's like, "Hey, yo, Shidoshi, we should totally show these like new bosses in Final Fantasy VII." And I hadn't played Final Fantasy VII. I didn't play the Japanese version or the American version. And I'm like, yeah, what's going on with them? He's like, yeah, in the American version, they're going to have like new bosses in it. We should like totally show these on the website. So I'm like, all right, cool. Give me some screenshots and then we'll write some text about it and we'll do a story. So he does. And so we put up the story, not thinking much about it and be like, okay, yeah, here's the new bosses in FF7. I get in the next day and I think it was Greg Rao, Greg Rao was one of the few kind of adults in the room at GameFan. He comes up to me and he's like, I don't know if we can cuss on here or not, but he's like,
go ahead.
What the F did you do?
Oh, no.
And I'm like, what? He's like, what the F did you do? What the F did you do? What did you put up on the site? And I'm like, I have no clue what you're talking about, Greg. What did I do? And he's like, Sony called us and they are pissed. They are absolutely furious at us. And I guess what I had done was I had unintentionally leaked these brand new secret bosses in the American version of Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, it wasn't out in the US yet?
No, it was not in the US yet.
No.
Nobody knew about it. And I didn't know enough of the game to know that it was any kind of a big deal. It was just literally Nick had come to me and like, hey, we should do a story on this. I'm like, okay, cool. That's how it worked. There was no oversight, no real management, no kind of direction, nothing. It was if Dave or whoever happened to even look at the site and saw there was stuff up there, they were happy. But other than that, there was nothing. I think the only thing in watching your video that I think you got wrong, and it's not a big deal, but the switch from publishing news at 6 p.m. to doing it all day was under me when I was running it.
Oh, okay.
Because I was just like, well, if this stuff is done, why not put it up? But it was, so I literally made that decision on my own and just did it and didn't ask anybody, didn't talk to anybody. I just did it. And that's kind of how things worked.
So it was you who decided to just put the news up when you guys got it. I don't know if that's, I don't know all the facts on it, but from what I understand, GameFan Online might have been one of the first online publications to ever do that. To just put it up live.
I know gaming wise, we absolutely were. I don't know otherwise.
Yeah.
But like, if you think about it now, it's really such a weird idea that websites waited till X time of day. And for us, it was 6 p.m. Pacific time.
Maybe someone else did it before. I just think it would be really funny if GameFan and you inadvertently changed the way that like global news is distributed. Like putting up like cloud fan fiction, cloud diva fan fiction.
So you have these kind of ideas of what you're going to see when you go to a company like GameFan. And when I got to GameFan, I was shocked. The place was like a big, just one giant like frat house. There was stuff on the walls everywhere, and like carpet stains and stuff. It was shocking to me walking into GameFan offices that those people could make a magazine, a professional magazine every single month. And it was kind of like meeting your idol and just finding out they're a complete and total mess, and barely clinging to life and just can't handle every day. It's like these are the people, and this is the place that makes this magazine that I love.
Do you have any fun stories from that time period?
I mean, like, there would be fist fights. There would be people going up on the roof to smoke pot. There were, of course, the stories. The LSD and the coffee and everything. We had a few arcade machines in there and stuff. There were like dead rats in the cupboards and
What?
just like.
I do want to ask you about the federal raid on the GameFan offices.
So there were two.
There were two?
Well, there's two that I remember. And because there were so many people at GameFan and there were these kind of divides in different sections and everything, it wasn't always easy to know why things were happening. But there were two big times when I remember the feds getting involved. One of the older and kind of more adult guys who worked there got fired. This is from memory, so if I'm telling the story wrong, I apologize to him. He got fired, and he decided his parting gift to us would be reporting GameFan to the labor board and telling them that all these people, including young people, were working tons and tons of overtime and not getting paid for it. And so we had federal people of some level coming and talking to us for that too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you mean the Resident Evil thing.
Yeah, but that's thank you for mentioning that one too.
So for anybody who's in the story, at this point it's a funny story. At that point it was not funny.
Yeah.
But we would get a lot of games, especially preview builds and stuff, at the office. And at one point we get some sort of build of Resident Evil 2. And I don't know if it was near final. I don't remember if it was review or what it was. My understanding was it was Andrew Cockburn, who,
yes.
AKA the Inquirer, who did this. He had a friend, and I will never not find this funny. Is his friend's nickname was Bernie.
Yeah.
So Bernie was the guy who burned a copy of Resident Evil 2, and sometime between when we got our copy and the game coming out, a rep from Capcom is in some local game store in Los Angeles area, and he sees a copy of Resident Evil 2 being sold in the store. And he's like, wait a minute, this game isn't out yet. How do they have a copy of RE2? So he buys this burned copy of RE2, he or she, I don't know, take it back. And what they had done smartly was, for any copies they sent out, they had added some additional files on there to ID who had gotten that copy. And on the copy that he bought in that game store in Los Angeles was a file connecting to GameFan. Next thing we know, we come to work one day and the office is shut down by the FBI, who's raiding us to find out what we're doing and if we're a big like game piracy ring or something like that. And it tarnished our reputation with Capcom at the very least for years. I remember, Capcom, when they sent games past that, they would send reps to come in and like watch us play the game to make sure we weren't doing anything with it. It was a completely stupid move, but like it was a lot of people, a lot of young people who had little to no real guidance, right? There were no people there saying, not that you should have to do so, but hey, we're getting these games in early from companies. We have to respect that they're doing that. Please don't burn copies and sell them to, to game stores locally.
Yeah. When Dave left, there was a couple years where he was doing Gamers Republic.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say 3 years. And then he starts Play up in the 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
And you ended up working for Play.
I had gone, so Dave had kind of a meeting at his house telling everybody what he was going to do with Games Republic and his mission and everything. And I had to make a decision, and I decided to not go. It ends up that I end up moving to Japan to go to college a little bit after GameFan shuts down. Something about that got me reconnected with Dave. So when GameFan shut down, me and Dave had a big falling out. I came in to play in 2005, and it had been running for at least a few years at that point. I think it was 2008. He convinces me to move back to LA to work on Play. I moved back in
from Japan,
mid to late 2008, and then like a year later, the magazine dies.
Oh, did you move from Japan? Were you still living there?
No, I had gone. I was back in the States at that point.
Okay.
So I was back in Nebraska, working there for a couple of years. I said it took him a few years to finally convince me to move to LA. I was running the website. I was doing writing and design for the magazine, and then I was also working on your favorite thing in the world, Girls of Gaming. So,
yes.
Yes.
I wanted to ask you about that.
and not only was I working on Girls of Gaming, I was in charge of making the digital issues and putting all the nudity into them. So that was my hand by which those images were added to them. Yes. So I think it was after the first issue that is around when I came in. I seem to remember writing. I think there was one issue that had like the girls from like Persona 3 or 4 in it. And I think I wrote their text. So I did write a little bit of text. But the main thing I was doing at that point was I was also in charge of putting together the digital issues, because we were selling those through Direct to Drive, which was like an IGN digital storefront. And so what Dave would do was to incentivize people to buy the digital copies as well, is we would add additional content to those. And so that would be anything from extra art we'd been sent that we couldn't fit into the magazine itself, to any of the R-rated content that he wanted in the issue that we couldn't put in the print version.
So how much of Girls of Gaming how much of that was Dave's thing? And like 100%. That he was just kind of, well, sorry, what did it say that again? I said
100%. Before you even finish your question, but finish your question.
So you were just doing what he told you to do.
Yes.
Okay. Because, it's really funny putting it into perspective, especially when I did like the full reading all about all the GameFan stuff before that and how people talk about him. Because then you jump to Girls of Gaming and he's really putting it all out there, like his personal preferences.
He's what I think the kids these days what we call like horny on main is what you would say. You know, Dave's two of Dave's big things were critters, which for anybody who doesn't understand what that means, it's like kind of like the
it's furries. This is what I got.
Furry, okay, kind of yes, but also there was a really big trend back in the 16-bit era of having all these like animal mascot platformers. It started with Sonic, and you had like Arrow the Acrobat and Kamikaze Squirrel and Gex and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So he really likes critters, and he really likes boobies, So we had those two appreciations would come out often in the play era. Was
that kind of like brazenness? Did he give that off in person, or was that just like, in his art?
I don't know how much I want to like actually say, because I don't want to disparage the man too much in certain ways.
Okay, it's fine.
There were a few things he would say where I felt a little uncomfortable about the kind of conversations we'd be having about game characters. I guess the one thing where it got kind of weird for me was when I was adding the nude content to the digital copies. Like, and I don't even know if this is going to make sense, but if you got like really good artists to make as classy as you can do it, right? If you like classier kind of, okay, these are risque pictures. I mean, this is gonna sound so dumb. Like, here's a risque picture of Jill Valentine and Claire Redfield from Resident Evil, you know? Like,
Sure.
It's a weird concept, but I totally, there are a lot of artists out there who can do really good erotic artwork for like game characters and anime characters or whatever. If you had people doing that for the magazine, awesome. I think there was a place for that and it would have made sense. But this wasn't that. This was like, okay, you know that render we've got of this character from the game that be in the instruction manual? Well, here's an alternate version of that render where for some reason they're just completely topless.
Yeah.
Like, these aren't even real people, but it still felt exploitative of these characters, you know? And it was sometimes characters where it's like, I feel weird, like, having this character be naked in the magazine, you know? If it's like Laura or what that vampire girl from like Blood Rain and things like. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense to me. Or if you have, you know, the succubus from like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, yeah, sure. But then you get just into some of these weird kind of characters where like you would never, like if it was like Princess Peach, for example, like absolutely we never had Princess Peach in there. That never would have happened. But he would commission, and this is kind of also where it felt weird, is he would commission artists to do adult artwork for some of these characters. And then he would be like, okay, make sure we don't actually say their name or the game they're from. Because if we say that, then we're going too far in the connection. And it's like, dude, Dave, everybody knows this is like, you know, Jill Valentine naked, right? But we can't say Jill Valentine because, you know, Capcom won't like that. Okay, but it literally is Jill Valentine if you look at it.
The offices again.
Yes. I'm not saying that Dave started Girls of Gaming to you know, beef up any of his personal folders on his hard drive. I'm not saying that, but I'm also not saying that. So I don't know.
When you said he commissioned artists, I thought you were gonna say he wouldn't, like, let's not put this in the magazine.
Yeah. Like Dave, didn't we spend like $5,000 on art commissions this month? I don't know what you're talking about.
So when you were back to Play, I guess, was Play run like GameFan? How similar was it?
No, it was definitely much more like a business. Being totally honest, like for 95% of my time at Play, like I got a paycheck every 2 weeks and never had to think about it, you know?
Okay.
And we had somebody named Brady Fichter who was running it. And he was a really cool guy. And he actually went over and he helped Steve Harris relaunch EGM when that happened. And yeah, it went mostly well, but Dave had this habit of when he had to put big boy pants on and do things that were tough, you know, is that he would suddenly just kind of vanish and his wife Julie would handle it.
Yeah.
And that part I didn't necessarily like, but also I got along pretty well with Julie at that point. So I would talk to her about things anyway. Most of the time we weren't in the office. It was just a small little office where a couple of people who had to be there for like office stuff were there. But for most of us writers, we just do stuff from home. And if we needed to have a meeting or do something, we'd go into the office, but otherwise we worked from home. So it was a very different experience from GameFan. It usually felt more professional. Said pay was coming in when expected, and you weren't going in the office. And if you did go in the office, it felt like a actual real office where you could bring companies to talk to them if you had to talk to them. Because it was always really embarrassing at GameFan to a point where there was actually a meeting we had where it's like, okay, we have to clean these offices up because we've got companies coming in to see us, and we can't have them see us in this way.
Or I guess like the scheduling problems fixed by that point, because there was that issue of Like Dave gets the games, he hangs on to them for 2 weeks, and then he distributes them, and everyone has to crunch.
He was a lot better about because he let Brady kind of control some things, and he was definitely like claim certain games, but he was better about not taking everything. Like we didn't have the problem of, okay, it's deadline, we're all waiting for Dave, and we've all got to be around for Dave. It was like if Dave's late, Dave's late, and then Brady had to deal with it, right? But like for the rest of us, if our stuff was done, the stress was gone. And one of the kind of things that I did like in that era, and something I'll give Dave credit for, was when I came back to work for him at Play. At that point, he really had a lot more respect for my work and appreciated better the stuff I could do. And so I got to have a lot more freedom in what I picked. So there were still, obviously, we want to cover this certain game, somebody needs to do it. But there's also the option of like, you know, for example, I would do a lot of the handheld stuff because people in the office mostly didn't care about PlayStation Portable or DS at that point. So I literally would just pick the games we would put into the issue for those two platforms. So there was also more of us deciding what we would do, which also helped in terms of getting things done. Because then if I know I've got 2 pages or 3 pages of PSP and DS stuff to fill, I can just get it done and then do it. So it was a lot better in that regard in terms of not having to wait for Dave and not having to wait till the last second for him to let go of games that he was still expecting he could do.
Do you think he matured over time?
I do. In not in all the ways that he needed to, but okay, no, I'm not gonna say boss, I'll say leader. Like, he was more of a leader. Like he understood better about kind of encouraging people and getting them to do what they needed to do and recognizing people's talents. Because a game fan, it really did feel like if you weren't in his little circle of the people that he hung out with and really liked, that he just didn't care about your existence. Whereas at Play, he kind of seemed to appreciate everybody who was working for him. You know, he wasn't always great at it, great at showing it, and then he did still do things that were just ridiculous that he shouldn't have done. But I think he was better about, because sometimes GameFan could feel like it was the Dave Halverson show, you know? Mm-hmm. But I think he did get a lot better about not just making it all his decisions. It absolutely was still at times, and I want to be careful about not having people think that he wasn't controlling at times. He still was, but he was much better than a GameFan in terms of like letting people do more on their own.
What was the end of Play like?
So I'm not sure I knew that it was coming, and this would have been 2009, and I go on vacation for Christmas, because the way it worked, since most of the industry shut down anyway around Christmas time, is we would always have the week of Christmas off and the week of New Year's off. So I flew back home, and I'm there just kind of relaxing for Christmas, and I get a call from Julie, Dave's wife, and she's like, "Hey, I need you to update the site with some stuff." And I'm like, "Well, Julie, I'm on vacation. I'm back home. I'm staying with my mom. She doesn't really have a computer meant to like do a lot of like online work and stuff." I'm like, "What do you need?" And she's like, "Well, I need just to refresh some of the products that we're selling and stuff." So I do that begrudgingly, and then I go back to California after New Year's. And I'm doing work and just doing the same thing as always. I'm updating the website and whatever. And I'm expecting at some point we're going to start working on the magazine again. And it gets to be about January 15th. And I'm having a conversation with her about work stuff. And then something comes up where it's like, "Hey, we need to work something out for you." And I'm like, what's the problem? And she's like, "Oh, well, you were fired on Christmas Day." And I'm like,
"Whoa,
what are you talking about?" And she's like, "Yeah, everybody was let go on Christmas Day." Like, and it's like, Julie, it's like January 15th. what are you talking about? And so, like, all of a sudden we find out that for like 2.5 to 3 weeks, we've thought we've had a job when we didn't have a job.
Wow.
And that was
Had you
literally
gotten
how
your
play ended.
had you gotten your paycheck?
No. With both GameFan and Play, it was kind of like the not with a roar but a whimper kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was just going, and then all of a sudden it's gone. I had loved GameFan so much, and it broke my heart when it died, and I hated it when it died. But I was also in a place where I wasn't completely bummed that it had died, because GameFan had kind of become something I wasn't always completely happy with, and the company was having troubles anyway and stuff. So it wasn't a surprise, but Play came as a surprise, and I think in those final days that to me Play had really felt the closest we ever got to a return to GameFan. You had a passion for what we were doing. I think it kind of came out in our writing. So it was the closest I think we ever got to having GameFan back. And I loved what we were doing at Play. And to have it die just so suddenly without warning, like, really crushed me.
So there was no writing on the wall kind of thing?
No, I say other than the fact that like 2 checks had issues, that was the only thing that I knew personally. Otherwise,
Wow.
there was just no sign that we were in trouble.
Wow. So I guess they must have been having some sort of money issues at that point.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't know the exacts.
What did you end up doing after Play? I mean, that sounds like a stressful situation to get booted out on.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out like what to do. Like it was kind of one of those things where like I just don't know if I want to get back into gaming again or not. And while I was trying to find out, so Brady, who had been running Play, he goes and meets up with Steve Harris, who Steve Harris was the guy who started Electronic Game Monthly back in the day. And EGM had died under Ziff Davis, and Steve was thinking about relaunching it. And so Brady goes and helps them do the relaunch, but Steve's not really happy with the staff, and so they're getting ready to kind of get rid of a lot of staff that they had on and bring in new people and take it in a kind of different direction. And Brady comes to me and he's like, "Hey, do you want to do EGM?" And so I go and meet with Steve at E3, talk to him and show him some of my stuff, my writing, my layout stuff, and then I end up getting a job at EGM. I went to EGM and I've been there ever since.
Oh, you're still at EGM.
Yep.
Yes,
We
you
are not doing EGM anymore. Unfortunately, the magazine died. But during the time of us doing EGM, we also started up a magazine called Walmart Game Center, which basically, if you go into Walmart's in the game section, there's a free magazine that you can take, and we made that magazine as well.
Oh.
EGM, in what it was, just wasn't feasible financially because it was a more traditional kind of magazine, and the advertising just wasn't there for that. On the other side, when you've got a magazine that you're giving away for free, that's directly focused to a place where you're buying games and you can kind of promote the games that are being sold, that was a lot easier to keep going in terms of like the advertising and stuff like that.
Okay.
And it's definitely miles apart from what EGM was and what GameFan was and everything. But for all the kind of thoughts you have about what a magazine made for a retailer would be, we actually get a lot of freedom in what we put in the issues. Outside of a few things like, don't go girls gaming on it, don't show graphically violent Mortal Kombat fatalities or things like that. Sure. Beyond that, we've had a chance to really still do some really fun and interesting stuff in the magazines, and it's given me a chance to still do reviews and previews and things like that. So it's been nice to have that outlet for still doing something in print, and still have that out there in a world where print's just so hard to still do.
And you're also a podcaster.
Yeah, I've done podcasts. I started back in like 2001 or so.
Whoa. That's cool. I have to thank you for being very open about doing interviews in the past. Why have you been so outspoken about kind of your involvement with this whole story?
I think it's just because like it was there were so many weird things going on at GameFan that a lot of people have been interested in it. It's a kind of a weird territory to talk about a person when they're not there to like kind of answer what you're talking about them.
Yeah.
You know, and there's a lot of there was a lot of negative at GameFan, and I've definitely spoken about some of that publicly. But there's also a lot of fun there too. It was a really interesting place and a really interesting time. And I think one of the hard things to fully appreciate now is back then there were these very few chances to get your voice out there if you wanted your voice to get out there. And so when I got hired at GameFan, it was literally like a once in a lifetime kind of chance for me, because there were so many people who would have wanted to be there that couldn't. And so it was an amazing opportunity. It was a dream come true. And so as many things as went wrong there, it was also such a magical experience on the other side of that. To see someone like you discover it and then find it interesting has been fun, because now there's like this new generation of people who can discover it and hear all this for the first time and be like, are you serious? Right? Yeah. Like, especially now, like I think, you know, we're still not great in terms of work culture, but we're better than we used to be. And so to hear about some of the things that went on and be like, are you this can't be real. Like, this can't have been a real thing that happened, but it did happen. And so it's fun to get the chance to have new people discover those kind of stories too.
Unless you had anything else you wanted to talk about, we're almost hitting 3 hours.
Yeah, no, I said there's tons of stories that you could tell, but it's just like a lot of it's out there, or a lot of it's just like smaller stuff that, you know, if you weren't around, maybe you wouldn't appreciate as much. But GameFan was awesome and terrible at the same time, and it was I would never not have done it. You know, I would never change things. Like, I'm really glad I worked there. I'm really glad it happened. I'm glad I got to be part of that, and it'll always be something special to me. But it was also a completely awful situation to have been in, especially for people who were as young as we were. Well, and said the thing too, as my kind of final comment about all this, is the thing too is that, like, as terrible as some of his opinions have been on games, the thing is there's other people in the media where I'll say they had this opinion because they were just trying to get clicks, right? Or they had this opinion because they just didn't give the game a chance, or they personally just don't like this kind of game, or, you know, they're a fanboy or whatever. The thing with Dave is, as completely psychotic as some of his opinions on stuff are, I think it almost always comes from a genuine place. Like, there's always a question of, you know, has this person been paid off to get this game a good review? Sonic 06, right? Like, that's one of his most infamous reviews. Yeah. Is like, was he paid off to review that? And the answer is absolutely not. I do not think he was. I think everything he said, he legitimately believed, right?
Yeah.
And so in his madness, there is honesty to it.
Yeah.
And on some level, I can respect that.
Yeah.
As much as I might not respect his opinions, I can respect how he got there. And whatever you say about Dave Halverson is like, when he talks about games he loves, I think he genuinely loves them, and he genuinely thinks there's something good about them. And as completely wrong as he might be, like, he's not coming to that wrongness because of, you know, malice or ill intent or anything.
It's been awesome. It's been really fun.
Yeah.
If anyone who's watching or listening right now, be sure to pick up a copy of, what is it, the Walmart
Game Center magazine. Go in your local Walmart. If they don't have it, they'll have it at some point. But it's given out for free in the gaming section there. And if I can just give one quick plug for myself, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My my home website is mollielpatterson.com, which I know is a long thing to type in. So if you do just type in mollipen.com, mollypen.com, that'll take you to my site. And anything you want to know about me is probably over there. A lot of my reviews, I've done interviews with people like Hideo Kojima, Keiji Inafune, and a bunch of other people. There's interviews of those up there. I've got links to my podcast and anything else I do and all my social medias. So if you're interested in any of my work at all and want to see some of that, you can go there.
Okay. So everyone can check that out.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hit stop recording now.